an ancient symbol, scratched into Egyptian tombs and guarded by medieval alchemists, somehow ended up solving one of the biggest problems in modern chemistry. In 1865, a German chemist named August Kekulé figured out the shape of benzene, a molecule that had humiliated every chemist in Europe. But the way he said he cracked it had nothing to do with the laboratory. He claimed he saw a snake bite its own tail, curl into a ring, and spin in front of his fire. The problem? He waited 25 years to tell anyone. And historians still can't agree whether it ever happened. To understand why this story matters, I think that you have to understand why benzene drove chemists insane. It was first isolated back in 1825 by Michael Faraday, pulled from an oily residue left inside London's gas lamps. On paper it looked simple, 6 carbon atoms bound to 6 hydrogen atoms. But that ratio made no sense. Every other compound with so few hydrogens was violently reactive, the kind of molecule that grabbed onto anything nearby and tore itself apart in seconds. Benzene just sat there, calm and stable, refusing to behave. For decades, the smartest chemists in Europe sketched it as a straight chain of carbons, then twisted that chain into every shape they could imagine, and every single version fell apart under testing. The molecule was hiding something, and nobody could see it. Then came Kekulé. By the 1860s, he was a professor in the Belgian city of Ghent, already respected for early work on how carbon atoms link together. And according to the story he told much later, the breakthrough arrived while he was half asleep in his darkened study. He had done this before. Years earlier, riding home on a horse-drawn omnibus through the London night, he had slipped into a daze and watched atoms dancing and joining hands in the air. Now dozing by the fireplace in Ghent, the vision returned, sharper this time, long rows of atoms twisting like snakes. And then one of the snakes seized hold of its own tail and whirled mockingly in front of him. He woke, he said, as if struck by lightning. The answer was never a chain. It was a ring, a closed hexagon of 6 carbons, looping back on itself. And that ring changed things. Once chemists could picture benzene as a loop, they could finally make sense of a whole family of molecules called aromatics, the hidden building blocks inside dyes, medicines, and explosives. Kekulé's hexagon helped fuel the German dye and pharmaceutical industries that would dominate the rest of the century. It didn't rewrite all of chemistry, but it kicked open a door that thousands of chemists would spend the next 100 years walking through. And here is a piece the dream story tends to bury. Kekulé did not just wake up and announce a ring. He backed it with real evidence, pointing to the number of related compounds you could build from benzene. If the 6 carbons sat in a symmetrical loop, his model predicted exactly how many different versions of each modified benzene should exist, and the laboratory count lined up. The hexagon was not a lucky hunch. It survived because it made testable predictions that turned out to be right, which is part of why the fireside snake feels almost too tidy, a piece of magic bolted onto years of careful, unglamorous work. That image of a serpent devouring its own tail has a name. The Ouroboros. It appears on Egyptian tomb walls, in the writings of Greek alchemists in ancient Alexandria, and across centuries of European occult manuscripts. The word roughly means tail devourer, and it stood for eternity, for cycles with no beginning and no end, for a universe endlessly consuming and renewing itself, which is where the story turns strange. Chemistry in the 1800s was desperately trying to bury its embarrassing past as alchemy and finally become a serious, rational science. And here was its single most celebrated breakthrough, supposedly handed over by the oldest alchemical symbol there is. If you're enjoying this collision of science and the occult, take a second to subscribe. This channel digs into the strange stories buried underneath the history we think we already know. Now here is where the beautiful story starts to crack, in my opinion. Kekulé published his Benzene ring in 1865, and he said absolutely nothing about a dream. Not in the paper, not in the years that followed, not in a single letter or lecture anyone has ever found. The snake only appeared in 1890 at an enormous celebration in Berlin called the Benzene, thrown to honor the 25th anniversary of his discovery. He was the guest of honor, standing before a room packed with the most powerful chemists in Germany, and that is the moment he chose to describe the vision by the fire. 25 years of silence, broken at the exact event designed to cement his legend. To some historians, that timing is a glaring red flag. Chemists like John Wotis and Susanna Rudowski spent years digging through Kekulé's papers and correspondence, and argued that the dream account simply doesn't hold up, and that it may have been invented to strengthen his claim of reaching the ring first, because he was not necessarily first. Back in 1861, a Vienna schoolteacher named Josef Loschmidt had quietly published a booklet full of molecular diagrams, some of which drew benzene as a ring. Whether Loschmidt truly understood it as a flat 6-carbon loop is still debated today. But those diagrams existed, in print, 4 years before Kekulé's paper. And then there is the detail that really makes you squint. In 1886, a German parody journal printed a joke picture of monkeys grabbing each other's tails in a circle, mocking benzene's structure. That cartoon appeared 4 years before Kekulé stood up and described snakes doing almost exactly the same thing. But the skeptics don't get the final word, because the case is far from closed. The historian Alan Roque, who studied Kekulé more carefully than almost anyone, has made a genuinely persuasive argument that the visions are plausible. Kekulé really did seem to think in vivid mental pictures, and he described that quiet London omnibus daydream in the very same 1890 speech, a smaller vision with no legacy riding on it and no reason to invent. In that same address, he told the audience something that cuts both ways. He urged them to learn to dream, but warned them never to publish their dreams until waking reason had tested them. That is either the honest reflection of a lifelong visual thinker or the perfect line for a man carefully polishing his own myth. And the truth is, we may never know. Everyone who could have confirmed the dream was already dead by the time anyone thought to seriously question it. You genuinely cannot tell which. And that is the real story here. Not whether one snake was real, but why we needed it to be. More than a century later, the dream is still printed in textbooks and still repeated in classrooms, because in my opinion it gives us the version of genius we secretly want. A lone man, a flash of light, a secret handed down almost like magic. The truth was slower and far less romantic, years of grinding work inside a crowded field of rivals all circling the same problem at once. Whether Kekulé actually saw the serpent or quietly borrowed it from a symbol he already knew, the legend survived because it tells us what we wish discovery looked like, which makes it strangely fitting that the story at the center of it is a snake eating its own tail, a myth that never stops feeding itself.